Okay, take two. Um, let's see if this works at all. Seems Restream has changed their interface, their system, and we're going to give it a try. It's glitching out. It's giving me the wrong titles. It's wasn't streaming YouTube. So anyway, we're going to push through it. The global audience, my apologies. You get what you pay for, right? So, take number 2, dos. Where am I? November 8th, 2024. Greetings. This is episode 144. And today's coffee is the limited edition Guara. It is the specialty coffee variety pack that I got from Good Beans, El Salvador. And this apparently is a fancy schmancy coffee, SL28. I do not know what that means. Sounds like a laboratory code name. But it is a washed coffee. It is definitely different. It is World Barista Championship qualifier. So sounds fancy. Good afternoon, evening, Mo. Welcome. Sorry for that failed attempt before. Anyway, we roll on. Okay. So now that I have some coffee, cheers. And if you're not familiar with the Yogurt Cap Olympics, that was a famous Office episode. So let's celebrate some achievements today, shall we? And send a question or comment on Twitter, YouTube, or Twitch. And what country are you watching from? I never know. I literally haven't bothered to look either. There's probably some statistic or whatever. But for those of you watching live, where are you watching from? Okay. The last weekend, I had breakfast with some old friends. We get together maybe once or twice a year. And I believe I am the youngest person at the table, which tells you something. And so the joke was that it was like an episode of Grumpy Old Men, just with like 6+ people at the table. And, oh, Mo, welcome from the Netherlands. And so we were joking, and so it's all about, health problems and kids and, typical old men stuff. And what, I was kind of in this mood from a week or two ago where I talked about Plato's cave. And, oops, this is out of order, and so Plato's cave, it's not the greatest analogy, but like when the grumpy old men start talking and their worldviews come out and their preconceived notions about how things work, how things are, and this is this and this is that, and that's dumb and that's good, just typical stuff. Experts of all geopolitical concerns, naturally, as one should be at a cafe or a breakfast place on a Saturday morning. It was just fascinating to sit back and watch and in the cave analogy to see people who are looking at the shadows and they think they're seeing a reality. And then once they move up a level and they see the shadow makers, the image makers, to then think, oh, now I'm wise, I figured it out. And then maybe there's a person who has gone outside and seen the sun and seen a physical reality. And so anyway, it's just interesting to watch. And I thought I was feeling okay Saturday morning, but then I just got taken out by a cold. And so I was sick the rest of the weekend. So I caught up or rewatched a few episodes of Parks and Rec, an old classic. Watched all of them, but started watching those again just to, get through the weekend. And weekly projects. proyectos seminales. Tanya was in Vienna at Directions EMEA. Like many of you in Europe, I hope you enjoyed the conference. And those of you traveled from outside Europe, cheers. You have more fortitude than I. Flying from Los Angeles to Europe is an undertaking. And I saw Henrik Helgeson was there, so congrats on making that trip. It's a significant project, expensive, very time consuming. So I went to EMEA in Germany a couple years ago. I might go again sometime, but it's just difficult to justify the time expense and the effort. And we're continuing to work on the after action review. I have a call with Jocelyn today to review that. We are finding a few more communication gaps. So I got an email, I missed it, and therefore a project sat for 2 weeks without getting started because I didn't see the email that said, hey, this project has been approved. So yet another opportunity to improve our internal processes. Team Berlin is doing awesome. They're doing a great job. Berlin, El Salvador, we now have 5 people training. 4 are just jamming. They're doing great. And, from literally zero, from nothing, no ERP experience, no experience in the consulting world, not a single lick of experience. They are just picking everything up and running with it. So doing a great job there. And this week was a nonstop BCAL Power Automate Learning Festival. And welcome, Brad. Good morning. I don't have FOMO because I didn't have to fly over there. Plus, I had a cold. So, for better or worse, I just monitored on Twitter. So, good morning. So on Monday, lunes, I probably did a few things, but since I was fighting the cold, I had a call with our developer, and he and I discussed how we're going to fix the design mistake that I just vividly remember making. Like, we'll never need that. Sure enough, good morning, Christopher. Drinking his Americano and missing all fun things at EMEA. Well, hey, you're about to enjoy a nice, relaxing Friday and weekend, so cheers. So I remember designing this internal application that we're using and thinking, we won't need that. That's no big deal. It's just kind of a cursory discussion, and we moved on and we built our internal application. Well, I was wrong. I was dead wrong. I was just like, whoops, that was a really poor choice. And that choice affected the design of the entire application, from the client app to the Azure function to even the database structure, the encryption processes, the JSON payloads, you name it. So everything needs to be redone to accommodate this design change. And so, that's what we're working on, how to fix that. And this is a production application, so we cannot just, patch the whole mid-flight or fix things on the fly. So I came up with roughly 3 choices, or we discussed 3 choices. We can try to patch the code just as a fix, like literal duct tape and twine, just to avoid the error we're encountering in this particular use case. Now, obviously short term. Obviously, it's not a proper fix, but it at least kind of stopped the error from happening. But who knows? We may break something else in the process. Number 2 is we can kind of, let's say, refactor it. So we can try to redesign and rewrite the existing code to fix the issue. Maybe that'll work, but we're pretty sure we're going to open a can of worms here, and we're going to cause other unintended consequences, and it's just going to break stuff. And then we're going to have this code that we can't deploy and is not going to work because we're in the middle of fixing it. So we don't think that's the greatest idea for production. So we're going to take like the API signature, API contract method, and what we're thinking is we will just leave V1 as is. Great. It'll continue to function. And we're either going to create overloaded methods, or we're going to create alternative methods. Maybe we'll call it, endpoint 2, function 2, whatever, and develop V2 side by side. And we discussed the possibility of just deploying entirely new infrastructure, new Azure function, things like that. But the downside is that gives us a second object to manage in Azure Functions. So if you're familiar with that, that would be a separate application, I believe. We do not, I don't want to do that because we already have geo redundancy. We have load balancing. We, have West Coast, East Coast, auto detection in our application. That would mean we go from 2 URLs to 4 URLs. Our health monitoring goes from, say, monitoring 6 resources to monitoring 12 resources. So it just sounds like trouble. So we're going to keep the existing components, but we're just going to add extra functions, methods, endpoints, whatever you want to call it. So that's the plan. We're going to see how it goes. It's going to take a bit of work, but it kind of gives us essentially a clean canvas, blank canvas. We can copy much of the code over, but we can re-architect without risk of breaking the production code. So a little side journey that I did as a side quest, as the kids might say. Someone in El Salvador needed a new phone. And so he contacts me. It's like, hey, do we have time to pick up a phone and have you bring it over in a couple of weeks? I was like, sure, no problem. So he wanted a Pixel 8 Pro. And I guess there's already a Pixel 9, which is crazy because I have a Pixel 7. So we looked at Pixel 8 and I didn't even notice, but it turns out they're sold out, which kind of makes sense. They're an older model now. So he wanted a Pixel 8 Pro 512 gigabyte. You can't even buy them new. So I was like, well, they're probably expensive. Do you want to consider eBay? And I'd never looked at them on eBay. He hadn't thought of it either. Well, turns out there are quite a few resellers on eBay and they're refurbished. I don't know what that means. I don't know where these phones come from. It's kind of a mystery, kind of like the laptops. $469 versus $1,179 new. Now, will there be an issue with this phone? Will it last? Who knows? But that's just kind of the risk. But for $469, it's like, hey, let's give it a try. So, So I ordered that. It arrived, and it looks like it's in fairly good condition. There's a couple little things where you can tell it's either wear marks or repair or something like that. But I booted it up, did basic tests. It seems to work fine. Battery charges, the whole bit. So we'll see. And I believe this is considered, yes, eBay refurbished at the top. So after you purchase it, you get a 1-year warranty. It would be a massive hassle because on my next trip, I'd have to pick it up. If it doesn't work, bring it back, try to get warranty. So I don't know that it's worth it. But, this seller is highly rated. So then I thought, well, I am looking for a new iPhone as a secondary phone for El Salvador because I have some cheap Android phone that I hate for my El Salvador phone number. For my El Salvador phone, I'm like, okay, it's just, I'm fighting it constantly. So I just want an inexpensive iPhone. So sure enough, iPhone 15, just the regular iPhone 15, not a Pro, not a Max, 128 gigs. New, Apple still sells them new for $729. It's not available refurb yet from Apple. On eBay, it was $564. I was like, okay, let's give it a try. So I ordered it. It is literally, as Chris on Parks and Rec would say, it is literally brand new. Not a single scratch on it. Perfect condition. The USB port seems a little loose, so that'd be the only potential issue I might have. But again, I think it's eBay refurbished, 1-year warranty. And I tested it, got it set it up with a El Salvador Apple ID. Works great. And it's an awesome phone. And what was interesting is while I'm handling this thing, I'm like, this feels nice and light. It is a full ounce lighter. So instead of 7-ish ounces of, say, the 13 Pro or the 16 Pro or even the Pixels, it's 6 ounces, and it is noticeable. I really like it. And now if I look at all the specs of the 13 Pro, the 15, 15 Pro, whatever, I don't think I need the Pro anymore. And yes, there's one additional camera option that I would actually use, whether it's wide or telephoto or whatever, but I don't care about all the other stuff. all the high-end fancy stuff I literally never use. I don't use 60 frames a second. I don't use super duper 4K. I don't do cinematic movies on my phone. Like, I don't care about the AI garbage that Apple is going to push to the phone. From what I've seen, the initial reports are that it's horrible. I just want it to work. And if it's an ounce lighter, and if it's less than $600 for an eBay phone, I may just stop buying from carriers and buy this unlocked. Fully unlocked, any carrier, double check that. So yeah. So this is a new kind of adventure where I may get out of the 3-year free phone contracts with my carrier. So yeah, trying new things. On Tuesday, I have no idea what I did. I had a cold. I did stuff. I'm sure I did something. Wasn't terribly productive. I know I had clase de español. Then I had an app demo call with a prospect. It's all a blur at this point. Yeah. And did I already talk about this? I think I did talk about this last week. Oh, so anyway, if you missed last week, Stefan Moron has updated the BC Code History repository to include branches for every country and every version. So check out his blog for that. Pretty sure I talked about that last week, so sorry about that. I messed up my slide, sorry. Let me go fix this. Un momento. So let's do an animation there. Okay, so I've been having calls 3 times a week, I think, with Franklin to while he's learning AL, and I'm doing my best to kind of teach him AL development. And he's doing awesome. He is now. I had him create a card page. I had him create. I told him his next step would create a number series to have that number series auto assign. So he starts looking at that, and he's like, "Well, I looked at this code unit number series management." At first, I was like, "Whoa, that's great." I didn't tell him about that. I didn't tell him what a code unit was. I didn't tell him what number series management was. He figured this out, and he's like, "I'm getting this error that number series management is marked for removal." Awesome. Like, I knew exactly what he was going through. I was like, this is perfect. So he then goes through and he figures out to use Stefan's BC Code History repository, which I just mentioned to him. He figured out how to find the customer table. He figured out how the customer table assigns next number in the number series. And he looks at that. He's like, "Well, Steve, what is this additional code?" And so we talk through that. I explain an automated number series next assignment, the potential to have the manual number assignment. So he's doing awesome. Like, he's digging down into the code, asking questions, and doing a great job. So yeah, thank you, Stefan, for our BC Code History. It's been invaluable. We use it all the time. And now Franklin is digging into it. I just dug into it yesterday to figure out what values for enums were. So invaluable resource. And so Franklin is jamming. He's got number series working on a test page. We figured out a quirk about card pages and the role of list pages. And we also saw there's 2 forms of list pages. And I probably knew that, but really didn't think about it. So he's figuring out what those 2 forms of list pages are. One you do not edit, one you do edit, and what are the properties that make that possible, and how do those pages behave differently. So he is chugging along there. And then David, that should say Berlin team. There we go. Okay, now I've done it. So telemetry learning Berlin team, that's the next kind of big chunk of learning that David and Jocelyn are going to master. And David has already gone in, created his own App Insights instance in an Azure tenant. And he has connected that up with our one of the Berlin ERP Center of Excellence Business Central environments. And so he set up that instrumentation key, application insights connection string. And yeah, data is flowing. Let the spice flow. And so now that we are seeing the data flowing to application insights, we're going to be learning all sorts of stuff. So we're going to benchmark telemetry, pushing into App Insights, see if we can figure out an approximate cost, because that's one of the impediments to adoption, I believe. So we're going to try to get a feel for, say, how many records per day going into App Insights would cost this much, something to that effect. What is the typical volume of a Business Central tenant? We're going to get a couple of our customers, if we can, to point to a App Insights tenant and get a baseline for how much volume and how much cost a average customer might use. So that's what we're learning. He's also digging into the Power BI report. So he is looking through every single page in that Power BI report and looking for every page. He's looking at every metric. He and I don't understand what over half of those mean. Let's say 80%. We'll see it. I don't know what some of those mean, when they'd be relevant, what you'd use them for, when you would care. But he's going to look at all of those and he's like, hey, Steve, I saw that there are PTE deployment errors in this page. And I'm like, awesome. That's a great one. So we could monitor PTE issues and we could have live telemetry and help support customers. So Brad says telemetry is a wonderful way to see a lot about an environment, set up a transformation, pull out the noise. Yeah, and that's one of the things I mentioned to him, that let's say there's 1 million signals going into App Insights, and we only care about 100,000 of those, right? How do we filter out the 900,000? Ideally, we want to filter those before ingestion. And it's been a while, but I recall that Kenny or the BC team worked with someone to set up, it's an additional service is my recollection, which is unfortunate because Azure services, they just pile up so quickly. You had to set up some additional ingestion endpoint, and that provided with your filter mechanism, and that reduced the number of signals that hit your App Insights. I don't know if we're going to go there or if we'll figure out a filtering mechanism or just use the Power BI report. That's what we're going to learn. So he's aware of that. Brad says the cost estimator works well after you get some volume moving through. Yeah, so that's what we need to do. We need to get a feel for, okay, we have this customer, they have 8 users, they use these modules, like we have an approximate feel for how much volume they have. What is their corresponding App Insights volume? And then what is the corresponding cost? If you know the volume going in App Insights, you could probably use the cost estimator, but I don't know what a 4-user BC company customer does versus a 10-user versus a 4-user with 5 integrations, right? So a lot of variables there that make it hard to benchmark that, understandably. So we're going to try to offer this for a few customers, get a feel, and start to deploy. So yeah, ultimately we'll be offering a live monitoring network operations center service out of Berlin, El Salvador. Brad says, set the transformation in Azure on the table log analytics. Okay, and I'm assuming that's after ingestion, though. So I'm also interested in looking at the pre-ingestion filter. I suspect that's going to be a bigger hassle than it's worth, but we're going to at least be aware of that option for high-volume customers. So the goal is that Berlin will be doing active monitoring, full network operations center for our customers, and they're going to build it, and they'll be able to see live telemetry, and it will automatically create a support ticket in their help desk system and will proactively call partners or customers. So that is the plan. And if you were not aware, there was this little tiny conference called Directions EMEA going on in some town called Vienna. I don't know, never heard of it before. And apparently it was a big party. And I just saw, surprisingly, I didn't see a ton of tweets coming out of the EMEA. Maybe I'm just not following the right people, or maybe, I don't know. So I even searched for the EMEA, Directions EMEA hashtag, and there were some, but vast majority were ISVs or resellers of software. Not too many attendees or partners, surprisingly. But I picked up a few, one of which a couple people shared this. Microsoft announced that there are now 40,000 Business Central customers, whatever that means, using Business Central Online. So that's a new benchmark that we can reference. 40,000 is a pretty big number, especially given how relatively young Business Central Online is. And both AJ and Jeremy tweeted about this slide. And this was a discussion of, I think the context was the integration of AI, but it just happened to touch on how many architectural components are involved in this Business Central ecosystem. And it may be hard to see, but in the center there of the gray square, you have Business Central. In the upper left, App Insights. To the upper right, ChatGPT or OpenAI. Then two more OpenAIs. Then an Azure something. And then I can't even read that. Azure something in the blue hexagon. And then other components, other Azure components. There's a lot in the architecture. And Business Central itself, if you look at its architecture, is 20 different components of Azure that we don't really need to touch. And so Jeremy, Azure Search Service in the middle there. Jeremy had this version of the slides. There's a lot going on there. And both AJ and Jeremy mentioned the potential need for partners and or customers to have some level of competence in all of these areas, which are pretty far outside of the Business Central umbrella. And yeah, I don't know that we'll need to really deal with this directly. Some of the stuff will be ancillary, but yeah, I mean, get ready to take on new skill sets, get ready to invest, get ready to address technical debt, find entirely new pockets of technical debt that you didn't know existed. And yeah, we're up for it. Our team, the ERP team in Berlin, they are ready for it. They're saying, let's go. So, and you might have noticed two rather dapper gentlemen, Luke and Henrik, preparing for their presentation. I love it. Very clever. And this is following, was it Henrik? Was it you, Brad? Henrik and Brad in the dinosaur costumes. I missed that at DynamicsCon, I think. But yeah, I saw a few photos. And so I think it's very, very clever. I don't know if I'm going to compete with that as a presenter, but it's a lot of fun to see some clever costumes or outfits for presenters. And you might have seen there was a BC Birinar in Vienna for Directions EMEA. And some famous guy, Steve Endo's been a busy guy, but continues his weekly I Need a Coffee to the nearest 10. What is the latest episode number? And you, loyal viewers, all 16 of you, would know what episode we're on, right? And so you would easily have answered this question properly and advanced one more stage to win the amazing prize that they likely gave out at the Birinar. So thanks for watching. And you never know, one of the benefits of watching I Need Coffee every Friday. And Brad says that he's going to get me in costume next May. Yeah, I'm game. Okay. And another mention that I got was at a Cosmo Alpaca demo and presentation. And I fully endorse the product because we use it internally. We searched for a DevOps automation solution for our internal needs. And this won't be necessarily a good fit for other people, depending on what your processes are. But as a partner, as an ISV, we are constantly generating new repositories, new project, new repositories, new pipelines. And it was taking hours to get those set up. So this customer wants this PTE and another customer wants a different one. Then we have a new app source app and it has a library app. And so it was just way too time consuming. And it was, my developer was therefore disincentivized to set up everything and set up the repository, get the code checked in and manage the branches and manage the folder structure and test project and all the pipelines. It was a real hassle. So we looked at the alternatives, ALOps, ALGo for GitHub. But once he tried Cosmo Alpaca, he was like, whoa, it just was a game changer for our needs. We needed turnkey project, repository, pipeline, everything set up. And that was the biggest gain for us for Alpaca. And then the remote hosted build agents, another game changer. I had a local server in my global headquarters here in California, but I thought it was reasonably fast. Turns out it's not that fast. Their build pipelines on Alpaca are much faster. We are working through some issues in given our volume. So I think we have 60 to 90 pipelines running. And we're experiencing some type of issue where they're hanging, and we're trying to figure out, is that something in our pipeline? Is that an Azure DevOps contention issue? We bought an additional parallel agent, whatever it's called, but we're still working through that. But we are already experiencing capacity issues at our stage. So we're working through that. So without Alpaca, we'd be in deep trouble. So now, I talked to Ted about this, and he's like, I have a different scenario. I'm not creating projects left and right. I'm a customer. I've got kind of my fixed projects. So in that case, that feature of Alpaca may not be beneficial. But still, I think the hosted pipeline agents are very valuable. So that was my endorsement. Whoa, totally out of order. Okay, I was going to do these as a separate slide. That's what I was thinking. Okay, moving on. I have mentioned this before, but Jeremy has a second edition of his BC API reference, and I mention it again for two reasons. One, Jeremy, I think I need to get the version 2.0 from you. I bought it online, so I think I get that. Otherwise, I'll repurchase it, whatever. Because yesterday, I had to pull it up to research something that was not documented in the online docs. I checked version 1.0 of the book, and I'm like, I see a little more information, but it didn't provide the potential values of an enum, which not necessarily the job of the book or the BC API docs, but we are finding a very strange thing with Power Automate. It is sending us enums for a field that literally do not exist in Business Central. I went and checked the code. The values do not exist. And strangely, the API example in Jeremy's book references the same enum value that Power Automate is sending us. It's literally nowhere in the code. So I'm trying to figure out, where's this data coming from? Is this some weird oddity of APIs? And Power Automate is showing the same thing. So the story is that purchase invoices, when you query unposted purchase invoices or any purchase invoices through Power Automate, it is sending a value of status of draft. That status does not exist in Business Central. You have open and released for unposted. Status we can't even find on a posted. But when you query these things and you say, I want status of open, status release, nope, doesn't exist in Power Automate. So very strange, trying to figure out what's going on here. So anyway, if anyone knows, let me know. So that's why I want v2.0, see if it happens to mention it. And we are going on a wild goose chase to figure out, like, where is status of draft coming from? What are we missing? Why can't we filter on open or released? Like, literally the field does not exist through Power Automate. Now I need to check the APIs. Very, very strange situation. Moving on. Thursday, jueves. The dreaded question that I get all the time. Customer says, how much is my entire project going to cost? We've had a 1-hour phone call. Give me a price. Like, man, it is the worst question as a consultant. So this customer has this big, relatively large implementation, and then they have all of these crazy integrations with these third-party industry-specific solution that they use 2 different modules from. They want that integrated to BC. Then they use Salesforce, highly customized. They want that integrated into BC. 2 directions on some of these integrations. And they're like, oh yeah, I've explained it to you how much it's going to cost based on a 1-hour phone call. I'm like, we went through, reviewed our notes. We even reviewed the Teams call recordings. And I'm just watching these like, I hear the words coming out of my own mouth. I see some of the notes I took. I mentioned BC webhooks on the call. And I don't even know what I was talking about, because guess what? This discussion with this prospect has been going on since at least February of 2024. 9 months. No wonder I don't remember anything, because we had a call with them and then they disappear. Come back 4 months later. And they're like, oh yeah, we're ready to go. Have more discussions. They disappear for 5 months. And now they're gung-ho ready to go. Where's my estimate? I want a number. Like, why don't you have a number for me? We've discussed this. Well, over 9 months, I have zero recollection of what we discussed. Even when we rewatch the videos, we have no idea what we were thinking at the time. It's fascinating. If you watch a 3-4 month old video of your team's call, you thought clearly I thought I knew what I was talking about on that call. And now I'm like, wait, we didn't talk about this, what direction the data's flowing, what the scheme is, what the field's like. There's no detail in that conversation. So I don't know what to do. So I hate those conversations. I hate the need to quote without a design phase. If anyone has a magical solution to deal with this, let me know. I don't know. So now it's, Steve, why can't you give us an estimate for these 12 complex multi-directional integrations with 3 systems? You're holding up the entire implementation. You're holding up the entire statement of work because, Steve, you can't give me a number for exactly how much all of these custom integrations are going to cost. So that's the challenge. We released a new version of a PTE. Our developer did, I should say, and our awesome Cosmo Alpaca pipelines to Azure Blob to Power Automate Flow to internal dev SharePoint site to application consulting SharePoint site. That process worked flawlessly, including email notification. So I woke up one morning and bing, new version of this PTE has been delivered to your SharePoint site. And all I had to do was create a basic initial draft user guide, send it off to our consulting team, said, please test in a sandbox. Done. So we are refining our internal processes, working great. It's awesome. Loving it. Just a little bit of housekeeping saves so much hassle, saves so many communication breakdowns. So that is working well. I had my 3rd support call with the same customer for the same reason. And I'm just like, oh, this was a Dynamics GP on-prem customer. And I mentioned before, I do not miss on-prem for this reason. Like, the consultant knows what they're doing. The customer kind of knows, but like, it's just a mess. So this is at least the 3rd support call where Dynamics GP simply doesn't work at all. And the consultant's like, I reinstalled it. I tested it. It was working. We get on the call. They're like, Steve, your product doesn't work. GP is completely non-functional. Like, errors galore. Just things don't make sense. Like, it's totally misconfigured. Like, look, 3rd call, 5 minutes in. Yeah, it doesn't work. Obvious signs. No one knows why. So I was like, great. When you get it fixed, let me know. So yeah, not a fan of on-prem anymore. Power Automate troubleshooting. We had some oddities. We push files, as I mentioned, for PTEs. We pushed that to a SharePoint site, 2 SharePoint sites, our internal dev SharePoint site and then our consulting SharePoint site. Had a strange permission issue with SharePoint. Had nothing to do with Power Automate. SharePoint suddenly stopped allowing the user who is an admin of the site from moving, copying, or changing files. Turns out it's a SharePoint permission issue. So that was weird. And we had that on the PTE side. We had it on our RDL and report layout side. So that got fixed. And then we're trying to figure out this issue with BC, where Power Automate is returning a status of draft, which is literally not a status of a purchase invoice anywhere in BC, as far as I could tell. So we're trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? Like, how do we filter purchase invoices? Very, very odd. So Ronald is learning trial by fire on the quirks, the issues, the challenges of dealing with Power Automate, and apparently the Business Central API, which, according to Jeremy's book, has the same return for status of draft. No idea what that means yet. And, mention the SharePoint permission oddity. Very, very strange. We're baffled on that one. And a brief mention of a BC blog. Check out Tanya's, Tanya with an O, Tonya, her blog, bcdevnotebook.com. She has a nice kind of like beginner's introduction to queries, and not just queries, but it's a specific use case of using queries for report data sets. And we've used this internally because we're a big fan of queries, because my developer and I, we're both .NET, SQL Server, stored procedure, views, advanced SQL optimization, set-based query optimization for Dynamics GP. So for us, queries are a very natural object to use. We love them for the performance. They have been very performant for us to solve high volume data issues. So I'm a big fan of using queries. And so she has this nice blog post for how to use a query in a report. So check out her blog. Awesome. I really hope queries get elevated to a first-class citizen in the AL world so that they're a little more usable, a little more accessible, and you're not having to deal with temp tables and API endpoints or things like that, and they can just natively appear on a page. But for now, queries for list pages, queries for APIs, queries for reports. Check them out. And I highly recommend, I don't see it here, but I highly recommend, if it is for read-only consumption, which I'm assuming is the use case, check out data access intent. Like, I would always use data access intent read-only in order to hit your read-only Azure SQL replica. And if you don't know what that means, tisk tisk, you should if you're an AL developer. Data access intent. Make sure to include that on any of your read-only operations. And, oh my gosh, totally wrong slide. I was wondering where that photo went. I was like, wait, what happened? I put it in the wrong place. Anyway, we have a new Olympics. Live stream, obviously. I have a call that is coming up in a few minutes with Berlin, El Salvador, and my usual BC project call with a customer. And the kind of side topic for this week is large Capex businesses. And being in the consulting world since I got out of college, literally I've done consulting since I was 20, essentially, and worked for Deloitte & Touche since right out of college. I have never worked in or had to deal with a large Capex business. So they just baffle me. I do not understand how they exist. Like, how can an airline function with these massively expensive jets and the overhaul of those airliners, commercial airliners, just staggeringly expensive to maintain, plus fuel, plus all of the airport fees and taxes and all of the massive labor workforce required to maintain an airline? Like, how is this possible? And what started this discussion as, so Sebastian says, save as JSON. Interesting. I'm assuming you're referring to queries. If so, I'll have to check that out. That's an interesting one. But let me know what you mean by save as JSON. Is that a feature of queries that I don't write code, but maybe my developer's probably familiar with that. Anyway, back to large Capex businesses. It started with a random video about, somehow this got into some YouTube algorithm dark alley about people still using firewood. It was a US channel, a guy in the Midwest, I guess. He uses firewood to heat his home, and they have these outdoor firewood boilers to heat their houses. And I'm like, wait, what? And that got me into how they're getting this firewood. And if you buy it, it's very expensive. So many people, they split their own firewood. And that got me into firewood splitters. It's an entire thing, entire culture on YouTube. And then this guy, Hometown Acres, interviewed a guy who does commercial firewood and how he has scaled his business up. And there's constraints at every stage. From a small operation, you're limited on capacity of your firewood splitter. Then you get a higher capacity splitter, you need more personnel to operate it. Then you need a bigger truck, you need bigger conveyors, you need loaders and dump trucks. And it's just really hard to scale because there's a constraint at every step of the way. And ultimately, the question is, I need this new $50,000 machine, or this $100,000 truck, or this $150,000 conveyor, or this $250,000 more efficient splitter. And at every step of the game, they are constrained by capital and expensive equipment, and then the personnel to run that equipment. And so they did an interesting episode with the guy who was testing this higher capacity. It's not even a splitter. It's a processor, I guess is what they call this. So check out Hometown Acres. The video is How Accountants Buy Equipment. They are both former CPAs, they said. So they're both former accountants, and they go through the spreadsheet of how they analyze their purchase and whether they can fully utilize this equipment. And what is the cost of that utilization? What's the cost to capital, first of all? And then what is the cost of utilization? So very interesting two ways of looking at the same piece of equipment. If you consider just the mortgage or the loan required for this and the loan payments versus a depreciation-oriented approach to the equipment, which I'd never considered. Really fascinating. So in my world, I don't have to worry about a $200,000 piece of equipment. So I highly recommend that discussion. That was really eye-opening. And then, of course, YouTube doing what it does, it serves up this channel. And my brain kind of broke over this. So this is a family farmer in Minnesota. The channel is called Millennial Farmer. An absolutely fascinating and very entertaining channel. And if you see that massive thing behind him, that massive metal structures, those are grain silos, and that vertical flat thing, that is a dryer, a grain dryer. So he farms dry corn and dry soybeans for subsequent processing of, say, ethanol. And that is a grain dryer, and he's moving the grain in between his silos into those dryers. Absolutely bonkers farming operation. And 1 minute he jumps into an $800,000 combine with a $300,000 to $400,000 head to harvest the corn or the soybeans. Then he jumps into a $1.2 million piece of equipment to do his seeds. And then he's got the tillers, or whatever that, I forget the term for tilling the ground after the harvest occurs. And what was also fascinating, thinking about all the Capex involved here, one thing breaks. A $5 piece of metal, a pin, a clip, a screw, a bolt, you name it. It shuts down a $1 million plus piece of equipment. It's just useless. Like, you can't run it. So there was some piece of metal that broke in this entire Byzantine crazy piece of equipment he's got on his farm, and he cannot shift where the grain goes, which silo, which dryer, like sending it up, down, left, right, because of one piece of metal broke that prevented him from shifting which direction things went. And that's what it means when he says, I broke my leg. It's the leg, which I think are these pipes that go to all the silos. Just this piece of metal broke, shut down his entire operation for the day because he had to crawl in there and get it fixed. So not only does he have to service the debt on all of this stuff, not only does he have to be very productive and be very efficient to utilize and make a profit off of all this very expensive equipment, he has to have the manpower, the staff. So he's using his 14-year-old son, who is now running a $1 million combine in his field. His 13-year-old daughter, I think, who's now driving the grain loaders to get the grain off of the combine and shuttle it over to the tractor trailers, which take it to his drying operation. Like, unbelievable. Like, I'm watching this, just binge watching this channel, like every single episode. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And this guy's running around like a crazy chicken, trying to keep everything running from truck to field to dryer to workshop to he's fixing his $1 million combine because something broke. Absolute masterclass on, like, I would love to work for this guy. Like, I wouldn't last a day, but amazing to keep his operation. And yeah, so Ted mentions wizards at fixing, yes. And it's he's in some cases he's willing to pay someone. Like he has to pay a guy to go up to the top of his grain silos or whatever the mechanism was that was broken. The problem is they're 3 months backlogged, right? They have the same challenges he does. So someone has to get a 50-foot picker up there in order to crawl into some crazy tube to fix something that's broken and is shutting down his multi-million-dollar capital equipment. Absolutely bonkers. So he has to be able to fix all his equipment. Otherwise, he's down for 1 day, 3 days, 3 weeks. Like, really, really amazing to watch. And I'm like, you are changing the oil on your multi-million-dollar equipment simply because what alternative does he have, right? And that's an example of one of his combines. I believe it's called a combine harvester, and that is the corn harvesting head. So from what I could tell, that's roughly a $600,000 to $800,000 combine, John Deere, and those heads are $200,000 to $400,000, like insane. And the number of moving pieces, bonkers. Like one thing goes wrong, one little bolt, a clod of dirt can clog that, shut down that thing for 2 hours as he cleans it out. And then this is the tiller, or I forget the term for it, but basically after they're done with the harvest, they've got to, clean up, turn over the dirt and get it ready for the winter. And so a bolt broke on this. It ripped off one of those metal wheels, and he had to go into town, buy the part for that, come back, repair. And so he's shuttling back and forth constantly. And absolute amazing channel in so many respects, like life lessons, work ethic, getting things done, technical debt, reliant upon critical service operators, having people who are willing to help you, being part of a community. The dealers, the John Deere dealers, being able to run out, pick up the phone, answer technical questions, because they know this guy is dead in the water until that piece of equipment is fixed. Like, really, so many lessons around it. It absolutely fascinating channel. And with that, I see Berlin is waiting for me on my call. So we are moving on. And speaking of which, Jocelyn has done an awesome job writing up the after-action review for the incident that we had where we had a report that was delivered for testing and it didn't meet requirements. It was just like, what happened here? We had several breakdowns. She's written up a full timeline analysis. I have a call with her this afternoon to review that. David finished up a report layout, like boom, he can just slam those report layouts left and right. Alyssa had an issue with the check format doing blank pages. You know what I'm talking about. And he fixed it instantly. He's like, yep, here's your issue. I fixed it. Boom. She's back up and running. He's now leading the BC telemetry charge. So he's set up App Insights. He's learning the Power BI report. So he's going to lead that. He's going to train Jocelyn and Ronald and Franklin and Miguel. So the whole team is going to be up to speed on BC telemetry. Ronald is moving forward on Power Automate. He's learning the fun and joy of the quirkiness of Power Automate. But we are working on our first billable. He is working on his first billable Power Automate project to automate posting of certain transactions in BC, which is very interesting. We're both learning a lot about that. And Franklin is moving along on AL Dev with list pages and number series. So he's doing great. And I am very proud of the Berlin team because I got this check in the mail. When I tried to deposit this check using my mobile app, it was rejected. Tried multiple times, rejected. Invalid check format or whatever the error message was. We cannot deposit this check. I was like, great, I got to take this to the bank, blah, 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 blah. And then I started chatting with the Berlin team. This is like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. On Teams, I'm saying, hey, David and Jocelyn, check out this check. It won't deposit. And Jocelyn instantly replies. She goes, this is the problem. And I think she's right. I didn't even look at it. You notice that Micker line? What's wrong with that Micker line? She's like, that's not to spec. I was like, go Team Berlin. She looked at this check and in 5 seconds saw the problem. And she's like, what was that consultant doing? She was like, that's unacceptable. That's sloppy. That's lazy. It's obvious that's not going to work. And that is because she understands this MICR check format. David does as well. And you need to have what's called a clear band at the bottom of the check. Now, I noticed some of my pre-printed checks from the bank do not have a true clear band. It is on the pre-printed check stock, but it is not intersecting with the line at the bottom of the check. So I think she's right. I think the MICR line can't be scanned. And I was going to drag myself to the bank. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go to the bank, stand in line, and hope a teller can manually push this check through and get processed. Like, it's just not worth my time. So I emailed the customer and said, oh, you have an invalid check. My bank rejected it. I can't deposit it. You can pay by credit card, pay by EFT. I don't care. Like, tough. And I'm going to make this their problem and not my problem. I'm in the very fortunate position where I can do that. And after both Jocelyn and David weighed in and said, this is a mess. You can see there's a line in the wrong place near the top by the date. And the font is so small, it's like terrible. So whoever did this check did not do a good job. And so I sent it back, said, hey, here's a bank spec. Here's a MICR check format that you can go off of. I sent them Wells Fargo because I couldn't find their bank. And they're like, oh, wow, let me talk to my team internally on this. I'm like, yeah, you might want to figure out how to create your own MICR checks before sending these things out to hundreds of customers or hundreds of vendors. So that was awesome to see. So Team Berlin is rocking it. And next, on the cybersecurity front, holy cow. Like, if you want your brain to be melted, check out this episode of Darknet Diaries. And I believe it was Ted who put me on to Darknet Diaries podcast. Holy cow. Episode 151, a guy named Chris Rock. I don't know if that's a pseudonym or what. He is presented at Black Hat, I think that's what it's called, the big hacking conference in Vegas. He is clearly a top 1% hacker, but he is a black hat hacker as well as being a security researcher. This story is literally unbelievable, as Chris would say on Parks and Rec. Like, holy cow. If this doesn't absolutely melt your brain, I do not know what will. My jaw was just on the floor during this whole podcast discussion. And folks, the lesson to take away from this is whatever you think you are doing for security, you are just amateur grade. And if you think, oh, only a nation state is a threat, no, folks. This guy could walk into every single account of you, your family, your associates, your business partners, your banks, your doctors, your dentists, your kid's teacher at school. It is unbelievable, the scorched earth capabilities that this guy and his team has. And he's just disgusted with how easy it was for him to do all of this. He is just so, like, just listen to the episode. Mind-blowing. Best one of Darknet Diaries has some truly amazing episodes. This is perhaps one of the best I've ever heard. Mind-blowing. So I highly recommend it. Even if you are not into cybersecurity, you'll understand what's going on here. Woof. Craziest one I've ever heard. And Q&A. Hope everyone has a good weekend. I will leave you with this. World.hey.com. This is a blog by Jason Fried, and he is one of the founders of Basecamp, I believe, and they have a few other products. This is an old blog post that somehow got retweeted, ended up in my timeline from May 11, 2023. It's called We Stand with the Underdogs. And I shared this with the Berlin team because I thought it was great. And it's very much how you may look at a big company, a big competitor, and you think, wow, they've got everything. They've got these big budgets and marketing, and how can we possibly compete with them? And the more I learn about those companies, the more I meet people from those companies, the more I realize that I would rather be the underdog and be hungry, be competitive, and really pushing to compete with those larger firms. And that's what we're doing. So great blog post, highly recommended if you're in a smaller organization. Yeah, world.hey.com/Jason. And with that, have a good weekend. Enjoy your Friday. I'm going to rest and watch the movie. I believe it is called Tombstone. Two people in my Twitter feed discussed it, and I'm like, wow, sounds like a good movie. So I'm going to go watch Tombstone this weekend, and hopefully it's as good as they say. So cheers, nos vemos, and adios.
Good morning, sun. How